Hello, and welcome to this week's screencast for the module People and the Natural Environment. This week I'm talking to you about the benefits of engaging with nature. So we're going to get into more specific kinds of benefits later on in the module, such as health benefits, but at the moment I'm going to start off with this general idea about it being beneficial to engage with nature. So following on from some of the things we've already discussed in the module, I want us to think about this concept of benefit from both an anthropocentric and an ecocentric perspective. So when we've, as I say, discussed this before, we've gone through little quizzes and things, and we've kind of come out with this idea that most of us on the module are pretty engaged with the ecocentric worldview. But in terms of how we've kind of understood benefits of engaging with nature from a sort of theoretical and policy perspective over the years, I think it's possible to sort of group these into more anthropocentric or ecocentric approaches. I'm also going to think about and talk about this the idea of access to nature and environmental worldviews and some of the ways in which engaging and accessing nature can alter and shift our worldview. And I'm going to focus on a theory called nature deficit disorder to talk about that. That links to this idea of kind of engaging and accessing nature being something that starts young, ideally. So, what might we consider to be an anthropocentric framing of this concept of benefits? So, anthropocentric framing, just to remind you, means kind of looking at the whole idea of benefiting nature from a human perspective. So, at the anthro and anthropocentric is human. So, I would argue, I think, that the way in which natural capital has been discussed and the ecosystem services approach to understanding benefits of nature have always been framed in quite an anthropocentric way. In other words, here are we, and these are the things that we can take from the natural environment, and this is the way in which natural environment benefits us in terms of providing us with capital and resources from a range of different environments and that benefit us in a range of different ways, from direct consumption, things like food and fibre, through to the more service approach in terms of things like nutrient cycling and aesthetic and cultural qualities. But the way we've always discussed this is to do with, we sit here and nature provides for us, and that's why we should benefit. That's why we understand benefit, and that's why we should value nature, because it gives us things that we need. So it's been a very useful concept as we've evolved in terms of our education around understanding the benefits of the natural environment. But I would still say that it borrows, as I've mentioned before, it borrows a lot of language from kind of economic theory, and it tries to discuss and frame the natural environment as something that we can understand in a kind of an exchange economy way. So it provides capital, it provides benefits, it provides services, it provides resources. And that can be useful up to a certain extent, but if we're in that mindset, then it also leads us into thinking about nature as something that we kind of harvest rather than something that we are part of. There are increasingly, and as I pointed out in the kind of environmental worldviews lecture, this is a return to rather than a new way of thinking. But increasingly, there is pressure to actually start to shift the focus of the way that we frame the concept of natural benefits to one that is more ecocentric. And that would put us very much in the natural environment, part of the ecosystem. And here's an interesting graphic that I found, which takes the development goals that you will remember from your first year module, development and sustainability, and it starts to arrange them into these interlocking circle and concentric circles. So this is a new way of kind of organizing and understanding the relationship between human activity and the natural environment. So we have the biosphere, within which is nested this ring of society, within which is nested the central ring of the economy. In other words, the economy is kind of the easy to remove center. You can remove the economy and everything doesn't necessarily fall apart, but you can't actually function without a biosphere. So the biosphere has to become the primary focus of our attention as people. So this is about this kind of attempt again to shift our perspective towards a more ecocentric worldview. There is plenty of evidence to suggest, so lots of studies that have been carried out which suggest that engagement and connection with nature, being engaged with and connecting with nature, involving yourself in nature, spending time in nature, is actually the way to improve our environmental worldview. And that would chime quite well with some of the things that we were looking at in terms of Indigenous knowledge. If you're if you live in an urban population, you've grown up in cities, then nature is something that you visit, or is something that is in the park, or you're slightly removed from it. But even today, if you're part of a rural agricultural community, a farming community, you're much more connected to the patterns of the yearly cycle in terms of the seasons. You're far more aware of weather patterns, and generally more connected to kind of natural cycles. And this is certainly true, as we mentioned, as human beings before we settled into cities, and we were far more dependent in a very direct way upon the natural environment for everything. We were also very much more aware of it, and therefore we respected it more as well. It's also important to recognise that there is a lot of evidence to suggest that it's early engagement with nature. So you can come to the realization that natural environment is important as an adult, but if you want to kind of embed these worldviews and embed these philosophies, then you need to get children engaging with nature from an early age. And engagement is a key term here. So engagement can be lots of different things, but it's about forming a connection with and understanding your place within the natural environment. And this is a graphic here from Natural England, which shows the kind of how important it is for young people to engage with nature in order to sort of form healthy, respectful relationship with the natural environment as they grow older. So I would encourage you to follow that link and go and read the report in more detail. But engaging is defined in quite broad terms by Natural England for the purposes of this research. So it could include visiting the countryside, so recreational tourist activities, spending time in your private garden, going to the park, so engaging with urban nature, whatever's available to you. Includes also watching wildlife television, so watching documentaries or watching kind of reality TV like Spring Watch and Autumn Watch, and then engaging in sort of voluntary activities, volunteering to help protect the natural environment. So making a deliberate effort to actually try and involve yourself and engage with nature in that way. So I'm going to now sort of bring these things together by talking about this a theory called nature deficit disorder. So nature deficit disorder is the Louv is Richard Louv is the author of this particular theory, and there's a reference to the seminal text there that you can go and read. But this theory basically says that there are wide-ranging and quite holistic problems if young people are detached from the natural environment. So they don't have as much first-hand contact with nature. They're very much shielded from the realities of the natural environment. And it's kind of this concept here of alienation from nature. And I think that's a really interesting one to think about. So to feel alienated from the natural world, and the idea is that this alienation from the natural world can bring about all sorts of disbenefits to both human beings and natural ecosystems within which they're embedded. So it can affect the health and well-being of individuals, but it can also change and shift the way that we engage with and understand and treat the natural environment. And I think there are some connections here with other theories that suggest the same thing, such as biophilia, which I talked about in the opening lecture. And again, these ideas connect back really to some of those Indigenous environmental knowledge theories that we've also been looking at. So This is not a new idea. Sometimes it kind of bubbles up to the surface again and someone captures it. And what's different, I think, about Louv's interpretation is that it's kind of a response to contemporary issues around childhood alienation from nature. So lots of the things that we think of, like screen time, and how children these days are kind of not encouraged to spend time outside alone. That's considered dangerous rather than beneficial. So some of the characteristics described in nature deficit disorder include, as mentioned, poorer health, and we're going to focus on the relationship between health and the natural environment, health and place, more as we move into the second semester. But also reduced ability to cope with risk. So yeah, this idea that the natural environment is a place of danger. Outside is dangerous. You can have accidents and injuries, and of course you can, but there's also lots of statistical evidence that shows that most injuries take place in the home, and actually the home is a very dangerous place as well. So for lots of people, both in terms of all the kinds of risks that we associate with letting our children outside, probably with one exception of road traffic, which is a serious issue, most of those risks are equally prevalent in the home. So you can trip, fall downstairs, experience lots of nasty injuries in the home, but we don't protect children from the home, but we don't let them outside. It also reduces, if we are alienated from nature, it reduces our nature knowledge and appreciation, and that's actually goes beyond just being a set of facts and figures and things that we know about. It's also this sense of an alienation, disconnection from something that's fundamental to us as human beings, as part of the natural world. So just not knowing about what the different plants are and the properties of them, and be able to identify aspects of nature, birds, flora and fauna, understanding weather systems, knowing how to cope outside. These are all things that are considered quite fundamentally damaging to us. And this final point, this loss of nature advocacy, is really important as well. So if we feel alienated and disconnected from the natural world, then we're also not likely to be fighting for its survival and to be prioritizing its restoration. So that's, again, kind of bringing in this slightly more holistic and slightly more ecocentric way of framing this problem. So people being alienated from nature is not just a problem for people, it's also a problem for the ecosystems within which we're embedded. And to wrap up then, why is this important? Well, because we have some significant challenges. This is a link to our own government's 25-year environment plan, and this probably isn't the most ambitious environment plan that you could look at, but there is still one there. You can go and look at it. And here are some of the aspirations: that we have clean air, that we mitigate the worst effects of climate change and also adapt to the reality of climate change, that we use resources from nature more sustainably and efficiently, minimise waste, etc., clean water, enhance biodiversity. The way in which these are phrased is all quite polite, really. It's not really expressing the quite urgent and extreme need to change the way that we behave in relation to the natural environment. But nevertheless, it represents a significant amount of challenge in terms of meeting these goals. And if we're going to do that, then we do need to not only engage at a policy level with actions, but we also need to quite fundamentally change the way that we see ourselves in relation to the natural environment. So I hope that's been an interesting introduction. There are some texts that you can go and look at further, but here are some references that I've talked about in the presentation today, and of course there are a lot on the reading list, and there will also be some suggested reading from this week's session. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks very much, and I will see you in class.